Okay, so I'll stand kind of around here, hoping that I don't, you know, what the camera does to you. Isn't it lovely? We hope now it won't go off because I have it plugged in and everything, so we'll see. Okay, I'm Patsy Daly. I'm the head of the EdSci Inclusive and Special Ed Department here at Maryon. I want to tell you just a little bit about myself, and then I want you to tell me who you are. I don't want to waste too much of our time because we have a fine tight schedule, but I'll start on time and I'll finish on time, if not 5 minutes early, right? Exactly. It should be sunny by the afternoon. So when the sun shines, we're done. Yeah? Okay. Thank you for being here today in lieu of last week because of the weather. I would have had a little bit of time getting here, and I only live 30 kilometres off the road. So I was a post-primary teacher. And then I became a remedial teacher back when remedial teachers were almost invented in the late 70s. And then I went to the States and I lived there for 25 years and I did a master's in special ed and a PhD in ABA. And I came back here. I worked there in colleges of higher education and universities in Michigan and Ohio. And visited about 400 schools in my job there and worked with teachers who were working directly with children with autism a lot. And then I came back in 2006 here to lead the graduate in special ed at Maryon. And I had to find Maryon in the map because I was a post-primary teacher, so I had never been at Maryon in my life. And I identified very strongly with the post-primary, although I've been in a lot of primary, and I spent 2 years in the primary back in the good old days when we were unemployed. Since then, I was seconded to the SESS, which is just going under the NCSE now. So I worked with the SESS half-time while I was half-time head of department. And we set up and run the CABA course there. The Contemporary Applied Behaviour Analysis course was started out as my baby, I suppose, and we developed it, and the people I worked with were fantastic. And I did case management. Teachers could take that for 5 days across the semester, and then they could go back to their school, and if they wanted help with a case, a child with challenging behaviour who also had autism, they could call one of the team out. Now, I didn't do the visits, but I did case management. So they'd come back and bring the case back, and we'd talk about the cases. So my stories come from those places. So you need to know, I'm not a parent. I have a dog and I have cats, and I'm not going any further at my age. So there are things I know about and things I don't know about. In the parent-child relationship, I've only been the child. So, you know, you need to know what I know and what I don't know. So we bring different things to the table. And then in 2011, 12 and 13, Emma Ring and myself were the lead researchers on what became Report 21. With the NCSE, which was an evaluation of education provision for children with autism in Ireland. And we went around to 22 different sites, from home sites to post-primary sites. We interviewed principals, teachers, special class teachers, SNAs, and the children themselves. And we got lovely drawings and lovely interviews with the children, and we wrote this report on the state of provision for children with autism in Ireland. So that's where I come from. I've done a lot of work with the Middletown Centre for Autism in the last, I suppose 8 to 10 years. Every year at different points in time, I've done different things with them, but I would offer a 3 to 5 day in service up there on behaviour, challenging behaviour. I've worked with some schools in the north as well, and to do a day with them on assessment of language, the VB-MAP enables in autism as well, and other developmental disabilities. So I like to teach, but I like you to talk. So if you have questions, please, you won't be interrupting me. If you say, Patsy, give us another example of that, I will. I go by Patsy, it works really well for me. And I'll try to make sure that everything I'm doing is really clear for you, and then the PowerPoint that I'm using, the tool that I'm using today, will be on Moodle for you, and I will talk about the assignment in the afternoon. Okay? So I brought my own lunch, and I believe you get a lunch here. Is that right? Okay, that's great. So just give me a 20-second. Now, if the questions divert us too much, I'll stop them. As in, I'll say, I'll deal with that at the break. Is that okay? So don't be offended if I if I say, because sometimes it's happened to me, been teaching for a long time, I get someone who talks a lot, and then other people behind her or him are kind of doing. That rarely happens in a group like this, though, because you're different. You know why you're different? Because you're up in the front. If I taught in here and I had this number of undergraduates, they'd all be down there, and I'd be yelling at them. So you're definitely different. So do a really a quick recce for me. So I'll kind of have a notion of where you're coming from, but literally now, 20 seconds.
Hi,
And your first name would be lovely.
I'm Claire.
Claire.
I'm an SNA in a special school.
Brilliant, excellent. Working with children who have
ASD.
Very good, very good.
I'm Sarah. I'm an SNA in a mainstream secondary school, but we have 4 units in our school. So
very good.
Units and in mainstream there's students
With autism.
special needs.
Wow, excellent, great.
And then I'm working in a mainstream secondary school as well, not working with any autism at the moment, but it's always been something I've
But you're interested. Grand job. Okay,
Yeah.
lovely.
I'm Myers and I work in a NENA in Galway, so I actually don't work with any special needs children.
No one in the NENRA.
No.
Isn't it a lovely word, NENRA? I love it. I think it's great.
I'm preschool teaching and there is one child at the moment, but I've done placement in an ASD class.
Did you do the early childhood program here?
Yeah.
Here I'm a primary teacher and mainstream is a child
You
in
have
class
child
as well.
in mainstream.
In mainstream.
Okay, thank you, Kira. Excellent.
My name's Orla, I'm an art teacher and I run programs in national schools.
International. And you have experience working with lots of different people, don't you? With-
Yeah, in the
with children
prison
with ASD.
system and in a wide variety of different behavioural backgrounds.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Jean, I'm a substitute primary school teacher, so I'm meeting children every day that have different needs, different everything.
I used to have an article called The Permanent Substitute Teacher.
Yeah.
What did you need to be a permanent substitute teacher? You always had to cut right to the chase, don't you, when you get in there?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a tough job.
I'm Pam, I'm a librarian in the city and we're hoping to provide more resources for autistic children.
Did you hear that? She's a librarian. So what I love about this class is everybody's different, you know. It's great. You will know what the class do, we get such variety. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Laura, I'm a support worker in a residential life for an adult with autism.
Hey, you have great voice volume. Did you hear it? It's so interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I love that. I'm thinking teaching all the time, but I have to think beyond teaching today.
My name is Amanda. I work as an SNA in a primary school, in mainstream primary school.
Excellent.
And I work with a child with autism.
Beautiful. Terrific.
I'm Carmel, I'm a resource teacher and special needs coordinator, currently on career break and doing some subbing in an ASD unit, and I also have a child with my own ideas.
Very good. Very good. You bring more than one lens to it, which is really important. Very good.
Hi, I'm Brian. I'm a trained secondary school teacher in languages and I now work at the City's Arms Commission.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah. I remember emails with you. Yeah. That was off the radar there. That was very good. Nice to meet you, Brian. Brian and I had conversations on email around the course last year. I remember that. Yeah. State Exams Commission did it for me.
I'm Eilish Griffin. I'm a public health nurse and I work in primary schools here in the city and county, and I have a little 8.5-year-old boy with autism.
Excellent. Again, a double lens for it. Very nice. I love that. The support network is really lovely. Yes.
I'm Christina Pascali, I'm a former primary school teacher and I have an interest in ASD.
And I know Christina. We've met before, haven't we? You've been through the grad dip here.
I have
You have indeed. My good, and you're back for more.
My name is Lynn, I have to go back into the primary school teaching next year, and I'm developmental special needs. So.
Oh, very good, very good. I used to find in America a lot of people in special ed had a family member, but it isn't always that case, so it doesn't have to be either.
I'm Jill, I'm a mum. I have a little boy with ASD and a nephew with ASD, but I'm also a secondary school teacher and we have an ASD unit in our school.
Excellent, excellent.
And I work with two classes, so
yeah.
I do mainstream and unit.
Okay, very good. So you've got a big, you have a big framework. Very good,
Yes.
very good.
I'm a resource teacher at primary school, it's grade school, and I'm working with children with ASD.
And do they speak English as their first language or Irish?
English is their first language.
It's a difficulty, isn't
It
it?
is particularly like with the AFD kids.
Yeah, it is,
It's
yeah.
a challenge.
The language is a challenge already.
Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't sorted that one out, that's for sure. No. I did ask you, I didn't get it.
My name is Kira, I'm a primary school teacher and my nephew is autistic.
Do you have any in school?
No, well, not in my class. no.
Not in your class, okay, so they're coming your way though. Yeah, you will at some point have a child, yes.
My name is Nessa, I'm a primary school teacher and I'm the first teacher into a newly established class in a mainstream school, but the class is a special class for children with autism in a small school.
Are you taking the SESS work or the NCSE?
I've been on a lot of
Yeah, you've been with it for 2 years, yeah. Take them all, they're great, yeah, yeah, so you know what I'm talking about, yeah, good for you. It's very disjointed when you do that, but it'll be worth it
Yeah.
in the long run, yeah.
Hi, my name is Sinead and my son is 6.5, he's autism and actually 18.
Oh, excellent, wonderful, I remember we had communications and sometimes as well, I do remember, yes.
I'm Eva, I work in a primary school, two-teacher school in the Belfast, and we just been graduated in ASD class in the past few weeks, so
Are you excited?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. Yeah, I've been down in schools at different points. They can range from excitement to terror, and sometimes it's visited upon them as opposed to we have been granted, you know. And so yeah, some principals have said, "Oh, we have them, we're all excited," but they weren't a bit excited. Yeah, so sometimes the principal was excited and no one else was excited, and then I got killed. Yeah.
Hi, Patsy. My name is Evelyn. I'm a resource teacher in primary school, and I work with children with autism. And I also know you from the about 10 years ago.
You must be one of the
you were just you were just newly appointed. You were
What's your last name?
Evelyn Coakley.
Yeah, okay, I remember the name. I do, and I wouldn't thank you for telling me now who you are. Yeah. And
Hi, I'm Bridget, I'm a primary school teacher and work with resource care teacher and I work as team teacher for children with autism.
in a primary.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Who came in? Yeah. You saw it, you figured out.
Apologies for being late.
Not at all, you're grand. Then make sure you just cup coffee.
My name is Stella and I work in the early years sector with children from 3 to 6 years of age, and I have children currently and past with autism.
Very good, very good. And you came in? Yes, see you. I didn't see you.
I'm in preschool as well, sorry. So,
You're grand, don't worry about it.
I have 3 children in grade 3 in preschool with ASD at the moment, and 3 for September, so it's been really timely.
Yeah.
And lots of assessments going on at the moment as well.
Yeah. Yeah, trying to figure out, trying to get to know and do all the good stuff. Sorry for the people who are going to be watching this later, but that's important to do so we know where people are coming from. Okay, that's great. Today we're going to look at 2 PowerPoints on behaviour, challenging behaviour, and we're going to relate it to anxiety. So the purpose really is to try and figure out when children with autism who don't have good language get stressed, sometimes that can lead to challenging behaviour. And if you don't understand that as a person who works with them, you can misinterpret it and you could deal with it incorrectly. And there's more than one correct way, but there are some incorrect ways to deal with this that make it worse. So that's what we're going to look at. So at the end it says you should be able to identify several characteristics of children with or people with ASD that have an impact on behaviour that can lead to what we call challenging behaviour. I often think of challenging behaviour, who does it challenge? You know, it usually challenges the adults around, and it can challenge peers and siblings as well. But we'll have a little chat about that in a minute. Understand the importance of arranging positive and supportive environments to encourage and support appropriate behaviour. Identify the key elements of a supportive environment for positive. You like that. We'll do an activity on that. And know the steps for conducting an environmental analysis. That's what we'll do. So this morning's the first session is an opportunity for us to look at the environment and see, before we ever get deep into data collection or anything like that, could we actually make changes to the environment that would make a difference to the lives and learning of children of people with autism, basically, people with autism. I have to remember to say people. I've been in teaching for so long. Okay, so from yourselves, you've had a lot now. You're in your 2nd semester, your 3rd and 4th modules of a 5-module certificate. What are standard, even though they're not all shared, characteristics of people who have autism that would have an impact on their behaviour. Throw them out for me, some of them. What do you think?
Communication.
Yes, okay. Problems in communication. And when you think of that, I write horribly, but you'll get used to it. Why would communication cause or lead to behaviour problems? Yeah, they can be frustrated because they don't communicate clearly and we misinterpret what they want, and knowing what you want is what a 2-year-old can do. Really well, she can tell you what she wants. She mightn't have sophisticated language, but boy, she can tell you what she wants really clearly. So if I can't put the language on what I want, other than dragging you, which in one of our stories was actually a challenging behaviour because the dragging was a 19-year-old girl and she would leave perfect handprint of a bruise on your hand, on your arm afterwards. Okay, so, but we didn't figure it out for a while. Just figure she was actually talking to us. What else about people who have autism contributes to behaviour challenges? Repetitive. Okay, the repetitive behaviours or repetitive language? There's two, aren't there? There are two repetitive behaviours. What were you thinking of? Did you have any in mind? Like self-stimulatory behaviours, is it?
Yes, or constantly wanting the same toy or the same DVD and watching it over and over.
Okay, and that, and who does that challenge?
Everybody but
the child. Yeah, yeah. Repetitive. It's an interesting one, yeah. And it's wanting the same, whatever. There was a kid, there was a child in the school, a special school out in Cashel, and breakfast sausages in the local, whatever it was, they were his thing. And he was little, and every morning the SNA would get to walk him up the town because it was a social and environment activity, and they would buy 2 breakfast sausages and they would put him in a particular container, a bag, and bring him back to school, and he would eat it. And then the place was closing down, and the SNA was having heart attacks because she knew breakfast sausages, you know. So she went to them first, and they were closing down. It wasn't a thing they could do. So she said, do you have any of the bags left over? Yeah, do you want them? We're only throwing them out. So she gets 100 of the sausage bags. So that's the piece, right? Of the right sausage bags now, because at least, like, that helps. And then they have to go to the local Centra and get those sausages. So they're not the same, but they're in the bag. Now he's all confused because it's a different shop and everything. But the bag helps. The bag really helps. And it took about a month before he would eat one of the new sausages, because actually we are kind of fussy about our sausages ourselves, aren't we? Mm-hmm. You know, we'd only like some. See? So sometimes having that autism, I want the same thing, ain't that different from what you and I want sometimes. Yeah, it's just much more extreme. Wanting the same, we're going to come back to that this in the middle session, because I'm going to make one statement about it now. The more insistent on sameness that a child with autism is, or a person is, generally the higher their levels of anxiety. It's really good to know that, because you get a youngster comes into the post-primary school and he's got high-functioning autism and he's grand until there's an unplanned thing in the schedule and he freaks out and he has a really difficult time calming himself. Have a look at how tense is he when he comes in the door in the morning. How tense is he? So an inability to handle, like, so what happens if I really freak out when something happens that I don't like? We'll try to avoid it, you see, so we try to avoid. Hello. You couldn't take your coffee there and find a table for yourself, your friend. Okay. And there's a silent list going around, so make sure you understand this list. What else?
What about sensory overload?
Yes, yes. They have sensory differences.
Yeah.
Sensory differences, as in they're over or under responsive to sensory stimuli in the environment. 80% of people with autism have sensory differences that matter. Over 80%. It's become one of the new DSM-5, the new way of identifying children with autism. It's one of the categories there is sensory. For the first time, they've recognised that difference. Okay. And there is a relationship too between the repetitive stuff and the sensory, and there's a little bit of development involved here, as in they can become a little less sensory dependent, if you like, or sensory driven sometimes as they get older. Sometimes, not always. Everything I say is right for some and not for others, as you know, because the one you know is only the one you know, and that's so true. Sensory is definitely different, and I think in schools some people have the hardest time with that because it doesn't apply to other kids as much at all. A chair scraping on the floor. See, but if you did a little survey, chair scraping on the floor. Remember the old days with chalk on the blackboard? Remember that? When the teacher would do that, they'd be saying, some people in the room would hate that. That never really bothered me, but it bothered other people. And if you did a little recce of the staff room and asked them, what is it that puts your teeth on edge and hurts your shin bones? They all have one. Okay? Just kids with autism have more of them. And they're a little different as well. Like we have a projector here. Can you hear it now? Yeah, so you didn't hear it all along, because I only drew your attention to it. But for some kids, that's what they'll hear. But that also affects kids with hyperactivity and attention deficit, where they attend to stuff. It's not that they have a deficit, actually, they attend to too many things. They attend to everything equally, you know, and they hear that. Okay, so these things bother them. What else do they have that impacts on their behaviour?
Not being able to maybe self-regulate.
Okay, yes. Not being able to handle this bit, or emotional regulation, okay? So emotional regulation, some of us aren't great at that either. Emotional regulation, and I say that, and it's kind of funny, but it isn't actually, because if you're sitting at the traffic light, there's a little old lady in a car in front of you, and the light goes green, how long will you regulate yourself before you get insanely angry? People they lose the run of themselves entirely, you know, and the thing about self-regulation is you need a space and a place to self-regulate. Children with autism need a place. One of these references I'll give you during the day, they call it Australia. I don't care what you call it. Australia is a lovely concept where it's not a time out, it's a time away. It's a time away so I can regulate myself. I'm upset, or I could be upset if you push me one more time. If you come that much closer to me, I'm going to be very upset. Okay? And being very upset means I might do that, or I might push you, or I might. So and so why would you do it like? You know, why would you go near them if you know that's going to happen? So you stay back and you send them to Australia. Australia, you have to have a passport to get in. You can only stay a while. Yeah, you bring your luggage with you and you bring it back out. So why are you going to Australia? You know, I'm going to Australia. I need to go to Australia. If you haven't, you're looking like you're upset. Why don't you go to Australia for a little while? I don't care where you call it or what you call it. But it's a place with a beanbag and headphones and a kind of a relaxation space. And think of how much we'd all like that, you know, a relaxation space. It teaches them a skill as well, that when I get upset, I can go to a place that, now what to do there, you have to teach the bits. I take deep breathing, I do this, I listen to, what does it that actually relaxes me? And this bit of self-knowledge is very important for people with autism. One of our goals really is to teach them to understand themselves. It's really important to understand themselves. So they can do this. We have a program on campus called the Certificate in General Living and Personal Development, CGLPD, and it's for people with intellectual disabilities. It's a certificate, CGLPD. It's a level 3 and 4 on the levels, where a level 7 is a BA. Okay, and we have several people in there who have autism, adults, young adults with autism. And this young lady was coming into this course, and the day that she came in, her mother they had been in to visit, and her mother dropped her off at the outside, and she said, "You're in college now, so you have to go in by yourself." I'd say she grew a nerve on her eyelid on the way in. She was so stressed. When I met her, she had this huge sty on her eye, you know, and she was sitting rigidly in her desk. And the people who run it are just so good, and they introduced her to what we call the Shomer Cadre, which is the kind of action room, which isn't too far. They go off, and she can go to the Sean McCodger anytime she wants to self-regulate. So she knows there's a space, because it's in this building. On a Thursday, the curry man arrives, so the whole building stinks of something other than potatoes and 2 veg, which is lovely, because most of us love that. But it changes the environment, because smell is a very powerful sense. Okay? And they have places they can go. So, yes, emotional regulation. Somebody else had a comment there.
Their routine, rigidity, inflexibility.
Yeah. It's like here, it's related to that.
Yeah.
And it's the insistence on that routine. And I think we've underestimated the power of that, and it is also related to anxiety and stress. We underestimated when Mama's driving them home, if there's a traffic light that isn't working, or they're now, which is what they're doing all over the world at the minute in Ireland, is fixing the water pipes. So there's new traffic lights everywhere, and you have to wait and you have to go around. Or if you have to do a diversion, because they're very savvy, like they know the way home. So if you're taking them home a different way, it can be very stressful. I mean, again, it's a change to the routine. Now, people used to ask at different points, especially when they worked in classes with children with autism, how much routine should I have? Am I going to make them more autistic? You're not. Like, they have autism. And one characteristic of many children with autism is this: they feel comfortable in routine, and we'll talk about it later. Why? Because they can predict. So they can predict so much in life, they can actually predict if I know my routine. And then I'm comfortable. It's like coming in here and you don't know what room you're in, and the building's big and complicated, and you're trying to find it, and for a little while you're stressed, but you get over it. When you find it, you're like, oh, thank God I found the room. That's easy. For kids, they don't get over it. So this routine really matters. So having a routine, so I love the routine, and then you just put in little changes to the routine, and then you alert them to changes in the routine, and then you see how they deal with it. And actually, Mom is the best person to ask about that. It's really important to ask Mom, how does he deal with change? I've been really surprised by that question, because I really thought they all had this routine problem, They don't. They don't. That's all. And there's 2 answers. Mom says one, sure, he's fine actually, you just have to tell him. And then there's others who say, oh, jeepers, if he's a new bus driver, we have to take a photograph of the new bus driver before he ever comes on board. He all thinks we're weird. Then we have to take the photograph home. We have to prepare him with a book. This is John who's going to drive the bus next week, and Mark is not going to be driving the bus, and we have to do it every night in a social story. And we build it up until the morning he's going in, and here's John, and we're hoping that he'll be okay in the bus. And then the other parent will say, oh, if I did that, it would create such anxiety. I just tell him on the morning, by the way, John's in the bus this morning, here he is, off he goes, goodbye. I'll close the door and he's gone. Because it's too stressful.
Can once more verbal, is it less stressful for them?
No, and interestingly enough, there's no relationship between whether they can speak or not and anxiety. No. And again, sometimes we're not aware, we're anxious. See, it's a level of awareness. You could be, when you're with your nearest and dearest and you're driving and they say, and you get into the city and you turn the radio off. I do that sometimes. Yeah. Especially now if it's Dublin I'm driving into, because I don't drive in Dublin well. And I'm getting in and they're all chatting away and singing the music and I turn it off. And the person says, you're very stressed now, aren't you? You're very stressed now. And they can tell, whereas it's much better for me. Now I know that's what happens. So I say, when we go in here now, I'm going to turn the radio off because I need that. I need to be able to just think about the traffic in here, so I don't have to be listening to Marty in the morning because it's too distracting. So, so the capacity for language doesn't mean they're more aware. Interestingly enough, it's an interesting finding. Would it be nice if it was that clear? But it's not. Now, language helps because I can teach them to use language sometimes to help them with this. But it does. There's lots of things you can do with language, where our goal is always language. Yes. Because children can acquire language, and we had a wonderful parent visit our teachers. Her son did not start speaking till first year. Whereas if we had been talking about children who were deaf, that would never happen. Yeah. It would never happen. So he started verbalizing when he was 13. Very different. Okay. Any other one come to mind?
Executive function or dysfunction.
Okay, he's not aware. Executive is a fancy term for I know I have a problem and I need to fix it. I have an example of that, a real example from a teacher. So executive function, it's the overriding management part of your brain. Executive function. In a primary school that was L-shaped, every day they had a 5-year-old who had autism, and the teacher would send him to the special ed teacher for a session. And she'd go to the door that crossed the yard, and she'd open the door, and the receiving teacher would be across the yard, and she'd say, "Do you see her? Off you go." And he'd trot across the yard himself, and off he'd go. And then eventually she didn't have to say that, she just opened the door and off he'd go. And one day, there was a lorry parked in the yard. Now, it was turned off because it was delivering something. And good teacher that she was, she didn't solve the problem for him. See, we're so tempted, you know. Now, there's a lorry there now, what is it? Shut up, just stop. Leave him, let's see what happens. He's not going to hurt himself. Off he went anyway. She said she couldn't believe it. She thought he was going to try to walk through the lorry. He went up until his nose was against the lorry, and then he turned around like, what now? Now that's a lack of executive function, because if you and I did that, we would say, oh, there's a lorry, oh, I have to, here's my problem, now I have to solve the problem. What have I done in the past? And it happens like that. But he did it. Now, you can teach some of it, but it's a conscious act for them. Whereas with us, it's almost automatic. And because it's a conscious act, it's slower. Temple Grandin talks about this at the airport long ago, before they ever made us do everything ourselves. You know, now you have to check in yourself, you have to get your baggage checked, you have to practically fly the plane. And so, way back we used to go to the desk, you know, and they'd give you a seat assignment, like right there. And she'd be flying a lot, you know, and she'd get to the desk and they'd say, and there'd be a big line behind her and they'd say, aisle or window. And she had to, in her head, she used to talk about this, is really interesting. Aisle, our window, the aisle, okay, the aisle is the middle, the window. Oh, that's a seat. And in the interim now, they're all behind saying, what is wrong with this woman? Because she has to process this in her head. So she could do it, but it was a conscious act. Oh, that's my seat. Yeah, I'll have an aisle.
Which is even the fact that she was given a choice.
Yes.
That caused so much,
can.
Which one will I tell my boss?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the only way to learn to make choices is to have them. But they don't need the choice of everything. They need limited choices. I mean, most of us have limited choices in the morning with our wardrobe because it's what's clean and what you look reasonably okay in on the day. And it's not going to be 500 outfits. For most of us, that is, you know? And so you look at what you have that you could look relatively decent and you think, where am I going today? I'll only be sitting, so it'll be grand, but I'll have below the waist, won't matter. So, but if you give him like 5 choices, it's too many. And you don't have to have choices of everything, but you can have little choices. I think we underuse little choices. Because if you don't give choice, all people like choice. Choice is related to quality of life. I had a student from America that I used to work with. She became a special ed teacher. They don't do primary education regular, they just do all special ed. So they're saturated in special ed, really good woman. She went out to a post-primary environment working with 18-year-olds in a special class. They have a team, their own psychologist, everything. Wealthy school district. She sends me this massive email out of the blue, hadn't heard from her in about 8 years, and she says, you know, dear Dr. Bailey, there used to be Dr. Bailey over there, God, nobody here does that anyway. We have an 18-year-old, and what she's doing in the middle of the morning is she's forcibly, we're in special ed now, so we always get to the bathroom or eating at some point, so this is the bathroom story. She forcibly has a bowel movement. And she pushes and pushes, she goes bright red, and now it's such a problem that there's blood and everything, and it's really difficult, and we can't figure out what on earth is going on. So we have a questionnaire that we use with the SESS, and I wrote her a whole page of questions. Ask your team, is it this, is it this? Does she have this, does she have that? How does she communicate? And one of the questions was, does she have a choice in her daily schedule? And nothing for 2 weeks, and the next thing she came back, no choices in her daily schedule, and when they gave her choices, like think about what she's doing. She's communicating. The danger in working with people with autism is that it's Too much schedule, too much choice. Too much structure, too much choice. It's a balancing act on an individual basis. She had too much structure and not enough choice. She made them give her choice by doing this. She got out of the next activity because they had to clean her, they had to call her mom. It took an hour to get her back and they started to dread it. So she changed their behaviour without ever actually consciously doing it, because she had a general learning disability as well. She had a lot of different additional needs. And once they put choice into her schedule, this went away. And so sometimes the answer is, it's about quality of life. Quality of life. Kids love choices, they love them. If you give me one more.
They're hungry or tired.
Yeah. Yes, and I'm a hangry person. Are you hangry? So we hangry here, yeah. So like if I get hungry, that's not good. So tired. And how would you know? Because some kids come in tired in the morning when you're teaching or when you're managing little kids when they come in tired. This homeschool communication is essential, and it matters at all levels, because sometimes we think it's only the primary needs the homeschool notebook. You need some, you can use an electronic system as well, but if you're going to use a text system, my suggestion is that there's a school phone that they can text. Like in our department, we have 50 teachers who are out there that we visit in the Grad Dip, and we have a special phone that they text to. They don't text my phone, because it becomes really not good. You know, it's better to have a located phone, and then mom texts in very bad sleep last night. So you know, if he's had a very bad sleep, it is going to impact on his behaviour, especially if you start with something difficult. So that is going to be called a setting event. That sets him up to have low motivation because he's tired. And the simplest thing to do is let him rest. And teachers hate this sometimes because they say, well, he's missing his education. But you know something? If you push him, we're all going to miss our education, because he's going to have a tantrum, and then the whole class is going to miss it. So you have to be smart. Sometimes they grow better in their capabilities to do things as they mature. And I have some stories around that. Okay, that's really good. So the characteristics that define a child or an adult to have autism can set them up for behaviour problems, because the communication social bit is really big. Okay, so we know that autism, and I know you've done this before, the DSM-5 has 3 types of criteria that have to be met for someone to have autism. I look at the bottom 2 first. It has to be present in early childhood. You can't get autism by accident later. So if you have a brain injury, God forbid, in a car accident, you might lose some speech, and your personality can change. I've actually worked with 2 people with traumatic brain injury whose sense of humour was really different after the injury rather than before it. But that's not autism. Even if they look or behave, it's not, because it has to be there in childhood, because it's developmental. It has to be there, and it has to impair everyday functioning. So some people with high functioning autism, or a little bit of it, you can have a little or a lot of autism, might never be diagnosed. And when people have workshops, like when Tony Ashworth comes over to Ireland, and there's 400 teachers in the audience, and he's brilliant, you know, and he does this thing on high functioning autism. There's self-diagnosis going on all over the room, and it's usually of their husbands. And he would say that it is because men with high functioning autism want to marry someone more like their mother who will take care of them, and the carers are nurses or teachers. And he tells lots of stories around that, and it's just this notion of it has to impair everyday functioning. Does it impair everyday functioning? Sometimes it doesn't. So a thing is not a disability if it doesn't impair everyday functioning. You know? Now, autism has such a range that in some cases it impairs everyday functioning in every way, and can be very difficult, you know. So, and actually the self-identifiers later, some adults, men and women who do self-identify, find it very consoling and informative that it explains themselves to themselves. that's why I am the way I am. I understand myself a little bit better now, you know. And then you've got the other two, and the other two are any two of these three: a persistent deficit, any two in social communication, and you have this already. Social interaction across multiple contexts. You can't have autism only in one place. It has to be in multiple contexts. There could be something wrong with the place. We have the LINK program, which is for preschool personnel as a certificate here. And I do a quality visit to the LINK program. I go down to see how they're teaching. And I go to Cork, because I'm from Cork. You might have detected that. So I go to Cork for this visit. And in one of the visits, one of the women who worked in that environment, they're mostly women, but not all, she told a great story about the fact that it has to be it could be in one context and not another. They had a youngster, and they were doing autism, and they had a youngster in her environment who had a lot of the characteristics of autism. Some of the repetitive stuff, some of the insistence on sameness, and the kind of the look, not a big sense of humour at the time. And the dad would bring him to school, and she was out in the country, and the dad came in one day, and very delicately she said, "Have you noticed any differences between him?" Well, he said he's our only child. You know, that means they've no comparison, right? But we don't live in isolation. And she said, well, what are you thinking, he says. And so, you can't diagnose, you have to be so careful, you know. I'm just trying to think, these things, they look just like socially maybe a little different. And eventually he said, what are you? And she said, well, are they more autistic-like? And he stopped and he says, no, but I know now what you're talking about. He says, we live out in the country, absolutely near no one except my brother, who has a child who has autism. He's his only friend. What did children do? They imitated each other. So your man became autistic-like just because he played with someone. And it's very instructive because he wasn't autistic only in that environment, because that's how he played with his friend. So at the end of the year, he was a totally different youngster, you know.
So that's going back to the whole question of integration, isn't it?
Totally, and who benefits, you see, because we had a person here with high-functioning autism, and we were not prepared for her for various reasons. We could blame anybody we like, and I remember adults in the environment saying, she shouldn't have been here at all, she broke a window with a chair, and I'm thinking, oh my God, that's an awful thing. How come we were not, why didn't you come talk to us? Because we know something about her. So places aren't prepared. Yeah. You know, places aren't prepared, and when places aren't prepared, the environment matters. So inclusion is not just about the child who has a disability. In my view, it's every bit as much to do with everybody else.
Yeah.
I went to school with no one with a disability, because the only girl with Down syndrome in my neighbourhood, her mother put her on her bicycle and took her over to Queen of Angels in Montenotte every single morning. That's how I knew her. And she was a great bit of stuff, this girl. She grew up to be the funniest girl you ever met. Very verbal, would buy and sell you. But we never got that exposure. So when they are included and they learn other things, sometimes you'd have your man and he'll be brilliant at his special interest. He'll know everything that ever could be known about. The latest one I heard was hand dryers. He knew the origin, the wattage, he knew the decibels, because they're awful things, you know, they're very, very loud. I know, because my office is next to the bathroom. And so I can hear every time somebody dries their hands, at least that's what I'm assuming what they're drying. And so, anyway. So he had all this specific, he could tell you everything. Now, so how can I use that? Well, if you have a table quiz, at some point you have to put hand dryers into the table quiz, because he will shine. And then other people think, oh, you know, he's the depository of esoteric knowledge, see? And then he's kind of, you want him on your team sometimes. Because some of those people who are in shows like that, don't tell me they don't have high-functioning autism. Some of them do, and a special interest in the Plantagenets. You know, Henry VII, something odd. Okay. Deficits in social emotional reciprocity. They can't read the emotional state of someone else. We do this all the time. Somebody honks you from behind, you look back in the mirror if they're smiling, You know them and they're kind of saying hello. If they're frowning at you or they're looking like furious, they're not your friend. We read their emotions from their faces, but faces are not reliable. They're not reliable, you see. You can't teach emotions from pictures of faces. It has to be context. Peter Vermeulen is brilliant on that. He has written a book about context, ASD as a context disability. Very interesting. I'll give you his reference later. And the Middletown Centre bring him over. He's a Belgian.
He did a talk yesterday.
Yes, he's here at the minute, isn't he?
Yeah.
Isn't he? He talks about...
I went to it. Amazing.
He's amazing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Best speaker I've ever heard.
Yeah, he's terrific. Yeah, he's a great guy. He is. Peter Vermeulen. I'll put his name on the board afterwards. I'll have to look up the spelling of it because I can't ever remember it. Deficits in non-verbal communicative behaviour. So we used to think it was just that they didn't have language, but they also don't understand sophisticated gesture. They don't read sophisticated gesture. They're like kids sometimes who have, some kids with dyslexia, you'll say something, how many times do I have to tell you that? And they'll say, about 6. And we think they're being bold, but actually they actually counted. They know it's about 6. They know it. And so the kids with autism don't read your body language. So they walk into the gates of hell totally unknowing that it's not a day to do it. Like you're standing there and you've had a really rough day and you're a teacher and the rest of the class have decided they wanted to ask for a homework relief, but they saw the status of yourself and they decided today wasn't the day to ask. But you know, they set up your man because he'll ask. He doesn't read it. So he can get set up. And they do. They get set up. They're very vulnerable to the non-verbal behaviour stuff. Or to being dared. Being dared is kind of a shaping thing. You dare someone to do something and it can be risky. One of our teachers one time had a brother, she told me this story. He was in first year. And the school was in somewhat of a disarray. The principal had retired or resigned, and they were in between having a principal, so there was a deputy principal, but the sort of business wasn't being taken care of. Anyway, there's a knock at the door one night, and there's a fellow looking from the GAA for fundraising, and the dad comes back in and he says, anyone have €5? And the kid says, Dad, I have one. And the dad looks at him and he says, where did you get €5? And now, the dad himself didn't get on that well. And he's moving in like this, you know, where'd you get that €5? Who gave that to you? And the mom says, well, she says, take it, I'll talk to him, off you go. So she takes him aside, and he's now stressed, you see, because he knew Dad was, he knew Dad was coming at him. And so the mom is talking to him, and where'd you get it? Well, do you know where I got it? He faced down the lorry on the road, because the 5th year boys figured out that he would do things for money, and they could have a great time. So they had him, and then he got €1 for a car, he got €5 for a lorry. And now they have to go into the school to say this is bullying, and it's actually life-threatening. So very, very worrying, you know. And he's vulnerable. You see, he's vulnerable. And the thing about kids who are high functioning autism, they can understand themselves. They can feel foolish. So you have to be very careful how you actually process that. So very serious stuff. And deficits in maintaining, developing, and understanding relationships. I now think that friendships for some children with autism are just different. And I don't think they're any less for them. They might feel less for me, but I don't judge them anymore because I've done a lot of reading about well-being in the last year and a little bit of writing in the area, and I'm learning that we have typically like 3 pieces to friendship. We have the intimacy where we share secrets. Now, men and women are different on friendships, but they can share private information rather than secrets. We can tell things to our best friends, yeah? And then we do things together. And we chat around things as well. So people with autism, when they're asked about their friendships, they are doing things together. That's what they are, doing things together. They don't seem to have the other levels of intimacy that friendships have for other people. And, you know, if it works, why is it a problem? Why do we think it's less? It just might be different. The difference, okay. So the problem is if they don't have any other relationships, we have this huge problem called school refusal. And school refusal is by youngsters who are very upset we were down in Cork interviewing in a post-primary school down there, and there were supposed to be 2 of the boys, and I got to interview one of the boys in 5th year. He was absolutely brilliant. But his friend wasn't there anymore and wouldn't come to school because his favourite teacher had left and gone to another school. And we used to think they didn't have any relationships with us. They most certainly do. And he was now living in his own room. Very bothersome, because then you're prone to depression. Prone to depression, and that's just not a good place to be. So the relationship bit matters for mental health. But they don't have to have loads of friends, but they do have to have people they do things with. Yes?
But could that be more of a sameness issue? Now I have a new teacher, my routine has been...
It could have been, except that in a post-primary environment he'd have had 9 teachers every day.
Yeah.
This was the guy who left. Other people had left before, and he hadn't. So when you follow the pattern, and in this particular school, they had a kind of a mentor system. He was his mentor. So he was somebody, he spent a little bit of time. Yeah, a little bit of time. There's always that little bit of sameness. But sometimes the sameness operates like you got new glasses. Who are you like? So when you get the new glasses, you might want to bring the old glasses in as well, because you're a whole different person with new glasses. I mean, in my view, it teaches us about human behaviour and human learning in a whole different way. If you can teach and work well with people with autism, you can teach and work well with anybody. Because they really pull you back to basic principles of how do I actually, how can I make this young man's day good for him? How can I make it good for him? You know, because that's the key. If I can make it good for him, he's going to want to come back tomorrow. I want him to want to come back. How can I make him like me? It's always nothing to do with it. That's a different part of your life. Okay? Totally different. Okay. And then this is the characteristics of the number, the last one. Restricted, repetitive patterns of behaviour. You got all of these beautifully over here. Stereotyped or repetitive motor movements, uses of objects or speech. Sometimes they don't seem to serve an obvious function. That's why we call them stereotyped. It could be this. But actually, they're self-stimulatory. So the problem with a kid who does this in front of a light is he doesn't need you to give him the goodies. He does it himself. I don't need you now, see? So how do I fix that? So if this is purely a sensory thing, it's very hard to change because it's happening inside his head. A brilliant teacher now, so they have this, but what does it do for him? It could be a calming activity. It could be a, I don't want to do that, so I'm going to do this because it feels good. A brilliant teacher, a bit of a nut now at the same time, but a brilliant teacher, had a youngster in her class who was interested in water, and he would do this constantly. So his hands were always wet, and now they were cracking, and he was getting infections. So we have a health and safety issue. Plus, my criterion, you really can't do this on the train to Dublin and get away with it. So it's, to fit on the train to Dublin is a good criterion for getting outside of your home and taking public transport. There are certain range of behaviour that's acceptable on the train to Dublin. This isn't within it for some strange reason, but it isn't. So the teacher was thinking, okay, if I could give him something else to do instead of that. So this is the first thinking. I take a sensory that looks like a sensory behaviour and I try to replace it with a more acceptable sensory behaviour, right? Until eventually I replace it with a private sensory behaviour, which we all have. Hair twirling, if you have facial hair, if you're a man, that is, you might do mustache twirling. You ever see that? They do glasses, how the arms of the glasses, you swing them in and out. Pen clicking, don't we all have those? Yeah? Okay. They're all acceptable on the train to Dublin. They're fine, nobody cares. There's worse than that happens on the train to Dublin. Okay. So she's trying to figure out what is it about the water lifting that he likes. Now I want you to think about it. What could it be? It's sensory, but it's not just lifting water. What is it about that activity that he might like? Noise. The noise. There's a noise, isn't there? There's a single. Okay, could it sound? What else could it be?
The light through the water.
It could be the light through the water. What else could it be? The feeling of the water. Okay, I'd say, that's it, isn't it? They're about the three, because there isn't the smell from water, there isn't taste. Yeah, it could be visual. So what she does, she moves the basin of water around the room. And he will do it here, but he won't do it here. When she turns from this way, he'll do it here again. So after she did this for a while, why is he now doing this? What does he get from it? It's the light through the water. So if she puts the water here, now this is genius, that's why she's nutty. Because this in my view, I would never have thought of this, and I'd never have thought of the solution either. So now she's thinking, okay, I need to get it away, so I need to provide him with a visual stimulus that he can lift. And she went to the party store and she bought a bag of sequins. Now we're still not on the train to Dublin, but we're closer. We're now in a kind of protected carriage where I could have some sequins. So now, and she puts the bowl in front of it. Now it doesn't matter where they are, you see. And she lifts him up, and he's like, oh, look at this. And he comes over and he does it, and then his hands are dry. So I've taken care of the health and safety issue about this. But he still likes to be visually stimulated. Okay, so now I have to move that step further. It's only 5. We'll get there. Okay, we'll get there. So you don't have to solve it totally.
A snow globe do that.
Which?
Snow globe.
Could, might.
Everybody likes picking up and shaking and then you see all that.
Could be. It could be. It's just what she managed to retain was most of his movement as well. She literally replaced the object. But I could, because if that would work, gee, would that be great?
You was thinking of a train, you know.
Oh, totally.
To a stage. I was thinking
totally. Yes. And how would I know? And one of the messages today, you'll only know if you experiment. You'll only know if you experiment, because I know a child it would work for, but I know someone it wouldn't work for. So you have to experiment with the particular child as to what would work. And sometimes we lose the run of ourselves in experimentation, and insistence on sameness, inflexible adherence to routines, ritualized patterns of behaviour, or verbal, non-verbal behaviour. A verbal behaviour example, to be or not to be, that is the question. I visited a classroom in Ohio, and I was watching my undergraduate teach this youngster. He had high-functioning autism, and he was very capable of reading, and she had him one-on-one for the session. And I was over here with my clipboard and my outfit, my supervision outfit, you know, what choice I had in my wardrobe that morning. And his repetitive phrase for the semester was, "Be or not to be." Love. Anytime he used it. But what I didn't know then is I should have actually recorded when did he use the phrase, because the phrase could be sensory if he uses it because he likes the feel of it on his tongue, yeah? But if he uses it at certain other times, it might be an anxiety-related phrase. And then I'd know if he used it when he's anxious. So I don't know why he used it, but he did. And he's sitting across the room from me, and all of a sudden, this just absolutely blew my mind, because I didn't, you know, it's an example of repetitive verbal phrasing, but in the middle of it he said, Hard Rock Cafe, Hard Rock Cafe. And the teacher, my student, was looking at me and she said, I don't know where that came from. I had a pin on my jacket from the Hard Rock Cafe. You could buy little pins. I had a piano pin that said Hard Rock Cafe. Hard Rock Cafe, big thing, we have them here. But they're big. They were big at the time in America, and we had one in Columbus. And he spotted it right across the room, and then it became Hard Rock Cafe. And I thought, oh God, I'm going to leave you with the Hard Rock Cafe now for 6 months. So they do change them. They change them. So when you have one, they can change them. One other one, and then I promise I will move along, but because I can go through slides very quickly too with the story, sometimes you'd hang on. We had a youngster who was in 5th year, and he had autism, but he was the gentlest boy I ever met. And he had the longest latencies to answer a question that you could commit sin waiting for him to answer a question. And I would say, do you have friends? And he'd have to think about it. And he'd say, yes, I do have friends. So it took forever. It was the longest interview we ever did. His special interest was graveyards. Loved everything to do with graveyards. Now, he looked the least graveyardy looking fellow you ever met, but he did love this stuff. Tombstones, the lot, not very socially positive. You could imagine there wouldn't be too many people he'd be talking to about graveyard stuff after the first 6 months. And the SNA one day brought her guitar in, they were doing something prepared for the Christmas concert, and whatever way she played a chord, and he just sat up straight, and eventually came over to her and said, how did you do that? And she had to stop and think of, when did she do what she did? And she said, oh, was it this? And he said, yes. She said, that's a chord in music. Would you like to try it? Now he changed his special interest from graveyards to music. He learned 5 instruments, none of them well, but he learned 5 of them. And now his uncle, he was 18 years old, his uncle used to play in the local pub on Saturday night. And your man goes with him. Now look at the social access he has, because his special interest is now in the mainstream. So it just changed by luck, you know, so sometimes it's hard to change it deliberately. Highly restricted, fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity. I think you should just admit you will never know as much as they know about whatever it is they know. There is the story, it's never been verified, but it's been told of the man in New York City whose passion was the subway, and that he stole a train and drove it from one station to the other because he knew the timetable so well. He knew exactly how to do it, and it was when he did it the second time that they arrested him. Absolutely had it down, had the maps in his room, knew exactly where, and all subways are complicated systems, as you know. So these are the interesting ones, and these are the ones that make people stand out, but they're also talents sometimes. Hypo or hyper reactivity to sensory input. We thought these kids were deaf. But when I graduated in 1974, my friend went to teach children who were deaf. She went to Dublin to do the course for 2 years. And then she came back to a special class. I'd say half the class now, thinking back on it, had autism. People thought they were deaf because they didn't react to loud noises. So this might do his head in, but the fire alarm would go off and he wouldn't hear it. So they're all different. Now, a principal thought they were deaf one time in America, and he put the autism class next to, in America, in postcard, the band room where they all had their marching band, you know, where band would practice. Now the teacher nearly threw herself out the window. Okay. These things are, they have to have at least 2 of these. Have to have at least 2. Okay. So what do they have difficulties with? They can concentrate really well when they're interested in something. But shifting a task, and this has implications particularly for the post-primary. We run the post-primary more by the bell. So he's in the middle of a task and he likes to do the task, and the teacher says, now, if the bell is going to go in a minute, we'll finish this tomorrow. Oh my goodness, like that is not, he's in it now, and he has real difficulty shifting his task. Now there's loads of things we can do with these. Understanding elapsed time, some of them. This is why I always say you can give him a time in the recovery area for a minute, because sometimes they'll be able to tell time, but they won't catch how long a minute is. So it's great, you have a whole minute in there now. No idea how long the minute lasts, you understand? Because he doesn't understand elapsed time, but you don't have to have him in there forever, so you get your minute now, if you don't. Yeah. Modulation of sensory input. It's very hard to modulate sensory input if you have difficulty with it. To be perfectly honest with you, I hate loud noises. I hate loud sounds, loud music beyond a certain threshold. And sound is the most dominant one. Sound sensitivities are the most dominant. And they're very hard to change. It's very hard to get used to a sound you don't like. Very hard to get used to. Their range of interest, we talked about that, can be extremely narrow. Well, you know, you could teach a lot of your subject matter using a train. The length of the train, you can do train maths, and you can do train language, and you can do train poetry, and in the primary you can do a lot. It gets much harder when you get to secondary. There's only so far you can go with trains there, you know. Managing non-preferred tasks. It's a way of choosing. And it's really hard, because the only answer to resistance to non-preferred tasks is to move them from a preferred task to another preferred task, which means everything has to be preferred, if you take that to its logical end. Part of the teaching job is to keep the instruction as interesting as possible. Now that is part of our job anyway as teachers, but it's hard here. So if he's going to finish on the computer, and computers are a mixed blessing. They don't promote social interaction unless you're very careful about them. You can use them for social interaction. And if you leave them unmonitored, all they want to do is their own thing on the computer. Every time in a formal educational setting that you want to use a computer, he should have to do two things. He should have to do work for you and then his own. He has to do something for you on the computer. You can't let it be a toy. It's too powerful. And it keeps him away from interactions with them. But it is powerful for him. And the nice thing about the computer is it's the same every time. If there's an instructional program on it, it never gets old, never gets cross with him. It never gets out. It doesn't require him to look into people's eyes, you know. He doesn't have to do any of that. So it's very powerful. Managing changes in the environment. Actually, I like the traffic light system for leaving preferred tasks and doing something else. You know, the 3 minute, 2 minute, 1 minute, or as, you know, you're in the green, and when I turn it, and I teach him this, I have to teach him this because otherwise he's going to hate it anyway. And then I'm going to amber and I'm going to orange, and I say, now you've got 2 minutes left, okay? And you're doing a really great job. And so he's on because he knows he's got 2 minutes left. And then I come over with my, where are you going next? And he's dragging his face in the computer. Where are you going next? And he looks at it, oh, I'm going over to the, yeah, I'm going over there. I'm going over to work with you. Right. Okay, and so like a really great teacher that I worked with would do this, and she'd give him the red light and she'd say, okay, it's time to shut it off. And she'd come over here to her language activity and she would play Thomas the Tank Engine music because he loved that too. And she'd turn the music on, she'd turn it up, and he'd get, and then he'd like, I think we'd leave, and she'd say, turn it off. And he'd turn it off, and because they could be very neat. Very neat and tidy. They could be very neat and tidy. You better be looking for the good things, you know? Very neat and tidy. And they can be very messy in post-primary, they can be a disaster. And their lockers can be a minefield, so they have to be very careful. Managing changes in routine. So they might have difficulties with some of these. Okay? So, the part of this that matters is could we arrange the environment to prompt appropriate behaviour? And could we arrange the environment to support appropriate behaviour? Could we arrange the environment to prevent misbehaviour, challenging behaviour? I remember visiting a school with a new special class. It's a huge ask to take on a special class because you're a teacher who taught in regular ed. Like nobody sent you off to do all the courses first. You got this with nothing, only your goodwill. And they said, okay, you're it. And the nice thing, the weird thing about us here is that we're thankful, which is really mostly. It's a privilege, like I was asked to take on that, even though I'm terrified, but I actually feel privileged that much to do this, but you don't know what to do. And in the special class, the door was here, and himself was here. And he was banging his head off the desk. That's a serious behaviour now. No, there's banging and banging. I didn't see bruise marks on him because there had to be a cushion there if he did that. But he's banging his head, he gets very frustrated. And I said, when does that happen? And the next thing, the door opens and the other kids come in. You know, they come in and they all walk past him. They all, and I'm thinking, okay, just move him. He doesn't want to move him. Move him into his own office. Give him his own office space over here and call it Tony's office. And put a nice thing on one side so that it's quiet, no one walks past it. Oh, Tony loved his office. Eventually he figured out he had his own office. They moved it, but nobody else there, so nobody was in his spot. But you see, you don't see it when you're in the middle of it. Sometimes you need outside eyes to kind of have a look at what's happening. So, okay. Now, they're not all that easy, but sometimes an easy thing can make a difference. Before we try to change behaviours, we should promote, prompt and support appropriate behaviours through environmental management. There's loads of things we can do in the environment to prevent behaviour. I'll give you one story. It hasn't to do with autism, and then I'll go through. Well, there, you can be looking at those. These are the things that we can have. We can have a quiet space, quiet room. We can have places in the room that you do different things at. And the more specialised the school is, the more likely they are to have specialised places in rooms for things. That just tells kids how to behave in different parts of the room. The younger kids are, the more important that is. It's not as important at the post-primary, but it's very important in the primary. So that if I have an art room, I know this is the only place that I can use water. This is the only place I show myself off. So there's things I do that are different in different parts of the room. That's very helpful. I had a teacher, a student teacher, who was, and we're just talking about the environment now, who was in a wheelchair because she'd been a swimmer and she'd had a swimming accident and broke her neck. And she was a great girl, absolutely, hugely, just a really great teacher. And one of her experiences was in inner city, Columbus, in inner city, and schools are funded by taxes on the house properties, and they were working up them, so the school was really a poor school, and the kids were challenging, to put it mildly. She had third class, and she had about 25 boys. And when I went to visit her as her supervisor, the first time, I had 2 visits, it was difficult, because they weren't listening to her, they were talking, they were running up and down this very complicated classroom, and she was having trouble. She was embarrassed by this, and we had a chat at the end, and I said, you know, the biggest problem is the behaviour management, so how are you going to get them to work for you? So we did a chat, and I didn't have a simple, because there's no simple answer to this. But one of the problems was that she had no access. They were devils, they'd get behind things. Because that's what kids do, that's their job, yeah? They'd get behind things and hide. That was very funny, but it wasn't funny because she was close to tears, but she's a very strong woman. And I went back 3 weeks later, and you wouldn't believe the space. Hello, Liga. And the space was completely different. There was a big centre aisle, and the kids had tables kind of like yourself, and she could go up and down the aisle in her wheelchair and access them. And the boards were, the dividers were sticking out from the wall, so they could be behind them, but she could wheel up and down. And I said, how did they do this? Oh, she said, I was at my wit's end, she said, and we were out in the playground one day, and I was doing something, and on my way over, I thought someone was going to fall off the swing. I did a wheelie in my wheelchair. I went over on the back wheels only. Well, she said, they all came over. They never saw anybody do a wheelie in a wheelchair. And she said, but I didn't. And everybody else was over, and she saw her kids looking, and she said, well, actually, I want my class to come over now so we can, and all of a sudden she became their teacher. So when they came in, they said, now, sure, you could do a wheelie in here, Mr. Floor's much safer. Which she said, how could I do a wheelie when I can't even get, oh, lads, they just took the place apart so that she could do a wheelie and so they earned her to do a wheelie, and it worked. It was beautiful. A simple environmental adaptation that worked with a very difficult group of kids. Okay, what can you change? You can change the physical setting to some extent. The amount of noise in it, crowding, maybe temperature, I don't know, it depends on your room. Some kids find it cold. I've been in special schools that are freezing, and I think they definitely shouldn't be freezing, because people who are in wheelchairs can't use movement to warm themselves. You know, so schools shouldn't be dependent on where they can't actually heat it after now, because you know we got snow last weekend. The social setting. What are the patterns of interaction around the child? And also, in terms of social setting, I'd look at what demands do you place on kids to work together or to be in a big group? To be in small groups, to be in pairs? One of the things I find is that when you group kids in groups, particularly all the way up to 3rd year, they don't know what their role is. Now, you get into a group there now and solve this problem, we say. You get into a group here and come up with 4 ideas. They have no idea who's to do what. I make laminated cards. I'm the materials manager. I'm the only person in the group who can get out of my seat at any time without permission to get us a pencil or a piece of paper or something. I'm the timer. I'll tell you when to start and finish. You call out, I'm the reader, I'm good at reading, hate writing, but I'm good at reading, okay? And you're the reporter, so you're in charge of the scene because the reporter has to report back. So they get a role, and on their role card it tells them what they can do. We underplay the need for direct instruction on what to do. Scheduling factors. Oh, the activities, do they match the learner's needs? Are they age appropriate and developmentally appropriate? Because I can change those and that's my job. Scheduling factors. Timing, sequencing and transitions. How do I manage those? Are they advance warned about things? Degree of independence. How do I use reinforcement, which is my praise system in the class? Do I promote independence by children? The degree of participation, group size, location and parameters. The social interaction needs to match instruction or opportunities and degree of choice. How much choice do they have? Now, let's have a look. So what we're going to do is, if we look at these, and we look at an example of them, so we're 11 is the break, isn't it? Okay, we'll actually get this started. So I want to look at these, and I want to have a case of a child with a disability who has autism and other problems as well, other difficulties, other needs, shall we say. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about her in each of these areas. I'm going to tell you about the physical setting and her, and the social setting and her, and the activities and her. And you're going to answer 2 questions about each one. We're going to do an environmental analysis or an environmental audit. And what this means is we're going to answer 2 questions. What's in the environment already that we should take out that's causing a problem? Now, some of these things are people. A special school principal told me that she had a youngster who could not stand coughing. People coughing. It did his head in totally. He had autism, he had a general learning disability, and he would completely freak out when people would cough. Well, now in flu season, that's really a problem. So once they start coughing, nothing gets done in the room. And so what she does is she actually takes him to the classroom where there's the fewest colds, even if it's much older or younger than him, for a week. Because he learns something there, he won't learn anything. Because the sensory overload is so shocking for him, he can't learn anything. So I can move people sometimes. If you have 2 classes in a unit is technically 2 classrooms, there should be some fluidity to allow for children with particular sensory needs. I know we don't like that because we divide them up in particular ways, but you know, we need to think fluidly around this if you can. The second question is there something missing from that environment that if I put it into the environment, it actually would support him behaving better? Like the girl that I told you about, when they put choice into her environment, her other behaviour disappeared, but it wasn't in the environment, and you have to see it first to know whether it will be or not. What's in the environment that should be removed, what's missing in the environment that should be added. Now, one of the descriptions that's given in what I'm going to give you as a case includes what's called Touch Maths. And Touch Maths is a program that hasn't come here from the United States yet. It's a program I just want you to understand something about, because you're going to have to make a determination was this appropriate or not. Touch Maths uses numbers, but it puts touch points on them, and it teaches calculation, not understanding. It teaches calculation, not understanding, right? It teaches addition, subtraction, you can do multiplication and division, but it doesn't do understanding what a number is, okay? So if you look like, here's a dot on number 1, and 2 dots on number 2, and 3 on 3, and 4 on 4, etc. And if you look at them here, I'm not going to spend long on this now, like here's a 6, and they're double dots. So I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And actually how I do it is I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then they have little things like, well, there's 2 ways of doing this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I punch them on the nose. So some of the rhyme is for remembering our salt of Ireland, but there you go. And then you've got the 8, you know, and then you have the 9. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So they can add, if I have a number 9 and a regular number 7 underneath it, if I know the dots, I can say the number 7, and then I can do 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and I know the answer. Okay? So they're touch, and they even have touch money. Okay? Now, it has never come here. Now, I want you to think. When you teach maths, you have 3 levels that are available. You have concrete, abstract, they're at either end, concrete and abstract, and semi-concrete in the middle. What do you think concrete is? I know I have maths teachers here. What do you use when you're teaching mathematics with concrete objects?
Use shapes, you use
things.
You can touch them.
Yes, you use things, yes. You can use anything, can't you? Yeah. You could use blocks, you can use, there's all kinds of special math stuff you can use. Okay. Abstract, post-primary. What do we use? What do we use to teach maths? What do I fill the board with? Numbers. I use numbers and symbols. Yeah? And in the middle, I don't have 3D stuff. I have a semi-concrete, which are pictures usually. So where would this fall? Is it concrete?
Yes.
Is it concrete?
Yeah.
Is it 3D? Can I pick them up and move them? No, I can't. Concrete is blocks. Things, objects, pencils, rubbers, whatever. Erasers, geez, God save me. Okay? Are they numbers? They are, but are they more than numbers?
Yeah.
Yes, they're semi-concrete. Now, we're actually going to take our break before we do this because you're all you're awake now. So what we'll do is after the break, what you have to determine is, given her age and her special educational needs, if they did maths like this, was it appropriate for her? And then if it wasn't, then they have to change how they do it. They take away what they do and import a different teaching method. Sometimes the method is wrong. Okay? I just wanted to put that up. So what we'll do now is we will take how long do you get? Half an hour?
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Look at that now. We'll come back at exactly 22 minutes after, and we'll start with an activity. And I think you'll really like it. Okay. Take your break now, and I'll turn off the video.